Now, who wouldn't want to be the lead singer of a band? Because you're the main guy at the front of the band, everybody's looking at you, it's all eyes on the lead singer, who is undoubtedly classed, or certainly in the eyes of everyone else, as the leader, the poster boy, and the top dog inside that band. Now, I realise there are some exceptions, but most of the time, unless you've got some incredibly talented musicians in bands, and let's be honest, there's plenty of them out there, it's always the focus on the guy who's at the front of the fortet, the quartet, the big band, the trio, whatever it is, they are the central focal point. So what do you do then when that lead vocalist decides that they don't want to be in the band anymore? Whether it's because they're sick of the music industry, whether it's because they're sick of the people in the band, or whether they just decide to check out of life in general, sometimes a band is left adrift with no singer. Now, for a lot of bands, this obviously means the end of the show. Nobody can go on, and that is the end of that. However, some bands manage to find their way to come back, and despite all of the internal struggles that come with losing your lead singer, they manage to find a way back to the front, and in some even more extreme cases, actually become even better. Fortunately for you though, there's only one front man in this band, and he's not going anywhere. So without further ado, I am Adam Nicholas, this is WhatCulture Music, and these are 10 bands who survived the lead singer change. Number 10, Alice in Chains. At the turn of the millennium, Alice in Chains were pretty much down for the count. After a few dysfunctional shows opening for Kiss, the band decided to go their separate ways as lead singer Layne Staley continued to go deeper and deeper into a drug-induced turmoil. And sadly, things would get even worse from there, as by 2002, the world was hit with the terrible news that Staley had passed away due to an overdose, and Alice in Chains were completely left adrift. As the band members pursued other interests, guitarist Jerry Cantrell and vocalist William Duvall decided to do a few shows together, and the timbre of Duvall's voice was enough to kind of make it work. When Cantrell went out on the road with Duvall, fans couldn't believe that the person singing wasn't Layne Staley. His voice was so good, the timbre was so perfect that it all just seemed to mesh really well together. They got in touch with the other members of the band, and before you knew it, Alice in Chains were back in business. The band would eventually return to the studio to make some new material, and from those sessions came the fantastic tracks Black Gives Way to Blue and Rainier Fog. The quality of tracks had such a good feel to them that it felt like they could have come off the back of the band's dirt period, and with Duvall at the helm, it seemed to show that there was life indeed after death. Number 9, Iron Maiden. In the late 70s, Iron Maiden emerged from England to emphatically stomp out all of their competition. They were producing a brand of metal that had enough ferociousness that it was actually powerful enough to kind of rival the punk movement that was happening at that time. The band had a best case scenario in Paul Di'Anno, who managed to use his frenetic screaming style of singing to take the power chords into something even bigger with this much more metallic swagger. But just as the band were beginning to establish a footing, Paul Di'Anno was let go from the band due to his reckless behaviour through drugs. The band began searching for replacement singers in earnest when they finally arrived at Bruce Dickinson, whose booming vocals were kind of exactly what they were missing. Maybe not the same as Paul Di'Anno, but something that really filled the gap. Affectionately known as the Air Raid Siren, Dickinson's vocals were actually so good they could bring fire to the older tracks while delivering those new tracks in a way that really made them feel special. Now, losing your lead singer as the band has just garnered its biggest success pretty much is not ideal for anybody, but Dickinson came in, he filled the void and helped them produce the tracks that would become synonymous with the band in The Number of the Beast and Run of the Hills. Number 8, Pink Floyd. As the 60s were coming to a close, Pink Floyd were on the cusp of a new kind of rock music known as prog rock. While the band was a group effort in its inception, the main standout was of course Syd Barrett, whose theatricality and unique style brought the band its own identity and made them what they were at the time. However, and this is probably going to be a recurring theme on this list, Barrett began consuming far too many mind-expanding drugs, and unfortunately, starting to affect his sanity. The sessions between band members had become so toxic and pretty much untenable that eventually Barrett would have to withdraw from the group entirely and actually remove himself from the public eye too. When the sessions began to get difficult, the band had hired guitarist David Gilmour as their permanent guitarist. However, Gilmour would eventually end up replacing the hole left by Barrett. With the band now a duo of singers in both Gilmour and bassist Roger Waters, it felt like they'd unlocked a little bit more potential in what they had within Pink Floyd, and they began to embark on producing some of the most adventurous albums that they would in both Animals and The Dark Side of the Moon. Number 7, Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath represented everything great about the early days of metal music. Instead of bands trying to outshine one another based on, I don't know, heaviness or speed, whatever it is you want to put in as a factor within metal music, Sabbath decided that wasn't going to be their bag. They were just going to focus on the chaos and the darkness of everyday life and put it into their music. Now, obviously, each member had their own individual lane, but the main starlet within the band was, of course, the madman of the Black Sabbath circus, Ozzy Osbourne. And yes, it's probably about that time where drugs and alcohol got involved with the lead singer of a band, in this case Ozzy Osbourne, and this time would see him completely dismantled in terms of what he could do on the microphone. It completely wrecked him as a singer and a performer, and eventually Osbourne would end up leaving the band. When the band did split though, many fans were wondering if either side would be able to continue. Would Ozzy be able to do it by himself, and would Sabbath be able to continue spinning their wheels? Thankfully though, Sabbath was reborn when they acquired Ronnie James Dio from the band Rainbows, and from those very first chords on Heaven and Hell, we knew that any pretense that this band were over was long and gone. Album after album would follow, and Dio would prove that this wasn't just a one and done. He wasn't just a flash in the pan, his quality was here to stay. And even now, to this very day, he is considered to be one of the greatest vocalists in metal music history. Number 6, Deep Purple. Now, Deep Purple are one of those bands that have changed their lineup so many goddamn times that at this point, it's kind of hard to know who's still there. But to be fair, out of all those people who've been a part of Deep Purple, a lot of people will tell you that Ian Gillan's stint at the helm of the band was probably some of their best moments, producing that high-powered shriek that really made every single song feel like a cinematic event. Once the band started to get major success though, tensions began to grow within it, specifically between Ian Gillan and Ritchie Blackmore. This would eventually result in Gillan leaving the band and would leave Purple in a bit of a predicament because they needed to get someone in who was going to replace such an iconic voice. Well, not only did they manage to do that, but they did in fact manage to get 2 great vocalists for the price of 1. While the voice of bassist Glenn Hughes would eventually earn him the nickname the Voice of Rock, it wasn't until David Coverdale joined the band that they finally discovered their true rock star frontman. Now, while you would argue that Ian Gillan's screams were the biggest drawing factor in the band back then, it would be completely different when Coverdale would join, and he kind of offered this bluesy tone to his voice that really kind of came to life on tracks like Mistreated, and really gave the band that little bit more musical depth that perhaps they'd been missing. Unfortunately, as we kind of alluded to at the beginning of this list, this lineup and this iteration of Deep Purple wouldn't last very long, and it kind of spiraled out of control towards the end of the 70s. But hey, don't be sad because it's over, just be happy that it happened. Number 5, Blink-182. Now, Blink-182 was a band that defined the 2000s for most teenagers, let's be honest. It brought with it that adolescent angst and those tuneful vocals that really tapped into an audience who was desperate for something of that nature at the time. But once the band started to hit that mid-2000s kind of era, every member within the band was at each other's throats, with all of them wanting to kind of veer off in different creative directions. This rift would end up causing a band split in 2005, before they would get back together in 2009, and then split up again because once again the old feelings all started to flare back up, and it's, you know, at the end of the day, you spend enough time with these 3 people, you're gonna lose your goddamn mind, not to mention the fact they all want to spiral off in different directions. And in this instance, it would be Tom DeLonge who was booted out of the band for good, and as you can imagine, everyone was wondering, what will we do without Tom DeLonge? How are we going to make another song? But once the band rolled into the 2010s, they managed to acquire Alkaline Trio singer Matt Skiba and bring with it a brand new generation and a brand new era for Blink-182. One that actually managed to fill the boots of Tom DeLonge. Now yes, Tom DeLonge's nasally singing was the kind of thing that suited the band perfectly, but Skiba's incredible vocals and stunning pipes would bring with it a whole new thing that the band could tap into, and actually ended up helping them produce some of their best pop punk in years. Number 4, Mother Love Bone. When the 90s got started, rock was about to be taken over entirely by bands that hailed from Seattle. From all the prospective heavy hitters that were out there at the time, Mother Love Bone were the ones that everyone was expecting big things from, because Andy Wood's incredible star power was that one thing that everyone thought was going to tip them over the edge against the competition. And yet, despite all of this potential and despite all of the good feeling around the band, sometimes life just kind of has other plans, unfortunately, and Andy Wood would tragically pass away of a drug overdose, which meant the band and their new debut album was completely shelved. Now, understandably, a few of the band members decided that was it for them. They didn't want to continue without Wood because they felt like he was the life and the soul of the band, the driving force behind it, and they didn't want to continue without him present. However, Gossard and Jeff Ament wanted to try something different and felt like there was still something they could do, so they soldiered on ahead. After scouring the city for singers, and I imagine that was quite a task in itself at the time, eventually a demo tape would fall into their lap by one man named Eddie Vedder. And once those 3 connected, they decided to meet up in Seattle with blues guitarist Mike McCready. And when the 4 was formed, they put together what would become one of the greatest bands of the 90s. They would go on to become one of the kings of grunge, and even though the band is of course under a different name these days, Pearl Jam will always carry the spirit of Mother Love Bone. Number 3, AC/DC. After half a decade of slaving away on the roads, AC/DC finally looked like they were about to break into the business in a big way. The band's bluesy hard rock had finally moved into the mainstream, and with the release of Highway to Hell, we finally had something that had really connected with a much wider audience. It was the perfect combination of Angus Young's furious solos and the incredible throaty squeal of Bon Scott. But once again, it seems like life, fame and fortune had other plans and completely derailed the band right at a crucial moment, as lead singer Bon Scott was found dead from alcohol poisoning not long after this, right before the band was set to release their next big hit. The band were understandably left absolutely devastated. Fans were left skeptical as to whether they'd actually continue at all. But once that mourning period was over, they kind of come to the conclusion that Bon Scott wouldn't have wanted them to end the band this way. This isn't what he would have wanted, and decided to try and soldier on. But who exactly would replace Bon Scott's voice? I mean, it was such a unique sounding voice. How on earth would you manage to replace it? Surely they couldn't manage it, right? Well, by some absolutely incredible and miraculous feat, Brian Johnson was brought into the fold to replace and try and replicate that kind of incredible noise that Bon Scott would produce. And would you believe it? He was right on cue. That textbook grit in the throat that everyone loved so much about Bon Scott's voice came exactly the same from Brian Johnson's. And off the back of that, they went into the studio and recorded Back in Black. And I just saying that sentence is incredible. Right off the back of all of this, we get Back in Black. Number 2, Genesis. When Genesis formed in the late 60s, their sound featured little bits from all kinds of genres. We had prog rock, we had folk, we had acoustic, and everything in between that really produced this great eclectic mix. So then you take that mix and you put into it an incredible vocalist in the form of Peter Gabriel. Not just a great vocalist, we should point out, but also an outstanding frontman and performer. He lived to be on the spotlight, he lived to be on stage, and he lived to put on some of the most bizarre and outlandish attires you could possibly see. He went to wearing everything from dresses to some of the most peacocky kind of outfits you can ever imagine. As the band came off the back of their ambitious double record, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Peter Gabriel was absolutely burnt out, completely done, and decided ultimately to leave the band. Now for many, Gabriel was the star of the band, and his presence, his ability as a singer were completely unequaled. Nobody could step up to the plate and take that. And with him deciding to leave for a new artistic direction, they were left in a bit of a pickle. So they had auditions for singers, but after seeing so many people come in and not quite tick the box, ultimately they'd find their new singer was hidden amongst the band the whole entire time. Cue drummer Phil Collins. From there, as the band went forward under the new Collins regime, Genesis would produce tracks like Misunderstanding and That's All, which were considered to be some of the band's most successful tracks in years. And while some fans will probably tell you they miss the eclecticism of Peter Gabriel, there's absolutely no denying that with Collins at the helm, they were producing some tracks that were just as catchy, and honestly, it was still a great fit. And number 1, Van Halen. Van Halen were one of the undisputed rulers of hard rock in the 80s, with Eddie Van Halen's incredible soaring guitars and David Lee Roth's undeniable stage presence. It seemed like the band would go on forever, but then the unthinkable happened. After the album 1984, David Lee Roth announced that he would be leaving the band. As you can imagine, this left Van Halen in a bit of a situation. David Lee Roth had such an incredibly unique charisma that it was going to be so hard to replace him. Instead of trying to actually just fill the gap with someone who sounded like him, they decided to go for someone a little bit different. And that right fit would come in the form of veteran rocker Sammy Hagar. And as soon as they entered the studio to start production on their next album 5150, it became immediately apparent that this could potentially be the best era of the band to come. The band were ready to go to even greater commercial heights, and while obviously the charisma of Roth was something that fans had loved in the past, there was no denying that Hagar's stage presence was just as good, but in a very different way. Even down to the way that Hagar dressed, it was just much more down to earth, it was much more inviting for fans, and they embraced him with open arms. Hagar would go on to flex his muscles on tracks like When It's Love, and to be honest, from a band who seemed like they were down and out and there was no recovery from losing someone as good as David Lee Roth, this is the perfect example that, believe it or not, miracles can indeed happen. So there you have it. Those are 10 bands who managed to survive a lead singer change. But as always, I'm sure you probably know many, many more down the line that we just couldn't squeeze into the list. So by all means, let us know your favorites in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and share. Hit the old subscribe button if you haven't already. You can find the original list for this on whatculture.com/music. You can follow WhatCulture on Twitter at WhatCultureMusic, I think it is, or whatever it is. Fill in the slot, James Dowes. I'm sorry I got your Twitter handle wrong. I'm Adam Nicholas. This has been WhatCulture Music, and I will maybe see you again soon. Who knows?